On today's Ask Zach, we're going to talk about all things Bigsby-equipped Telecasters. History, the players, tips and tricks to keep these things in tune, everything you need to know. Well, hello friends, and welcome to Ask Zach. Today we're going to do our deep dive on Bigsby-equipped Telecasters. Again, we're going to cover the full-blown messy history, which is awesome. We're going to talk about the B16. We're going to talk about the B5, which of course this original late 60s Telecaster has. We're going to talk about players. We're going to talk about tips and tricks to keep things in tune. We're going to do the whole shebang. First off, quick pause for the cause. I need to thank my Patreon members, and I need to thank everyone that's picked up a t-shirt or a coffee mug or given me a thumbs up or written a nice comment or shared my video with other people. I appreciate that. Thank you. If you want to find out more about Patreon, there's a link in the description. All right, let's dive in. So first, we're going to start with the history, which is complicated and messy, because it has to do with bad blood between Leo Fender and Paul Bigsby. So let's start with the invention of the Bigsby vibrato. So the Bigsby vibrato comes about because of Merle Travis. Merle Travis, of course, the great guitarist where you get the term Travis picking, and of course he was a great singer and songwriter. And he loved vibrato, and he had a Doc Kaufman vibrola. So, of course, Doc Kaufman was an early partner of Leo Fender. They had K and F, and then Kaufman drops out, and it just becomes Fender Electric Instruments. So, he had this Kaufman vibrola, and it wasn't staying in tune, and he was having trouble with it. And so he had Paul Bigsby work on it, and then he just said, "Hey, I bet you can't make one of these that stays in tune better." And of course Paul Bigsby wasn't about to take a dare without standing up to it. He said, "I bet you I can." And so there you have it. And so Paul Bigsby designs the Bigsby vibrato, and it's released in 1951, and the original model is the B6, which of course doesn't have any kind of tension bar or anything like that. It was designed to go on archtop Gibsons, and then of course it would also end up being used on Gretsch instruments. So let's take a pause right here in the vibrato history, because we got to talk about this mess between Leo Fender and Paul Bigsby. And it all goes back to Merle Travis had a solid body guitar made by Paul Bigsby in the late 1940s. He had drawn this thing out, Merle Travis did, and then he had Bigsby make it, and it had 6 in-a-line machine heads, and it had the Bigsby headstock, which of course way predates the Strat. And of course it's solid body, it's got a single coil pickup, it's single cutaway, yeah. And so Merle Travis was playing this guitar in Southern California. Leo Fender comes out to the show. After the show, he says to Merle Travis, "Hey, can I borrow your guitar?" So Leo Fender borrows the Bigsby Merle Travis guitar, and he figures out all sorts of things. The biggest being that At that point, you couldn't get a set of Kluson machine heads that were 6 in a line. And so what Bigsby had figured out was that if you get 2 sets of, 3 on a side tuners, you can use the upper side, 2 of the upper sides, and if you grind the ends on a couple of them, you can fit them all together and you can get straight string pull. Sound familiar? That's what Leo Fender will use a couple years later in his marketing for the Broadcaster. So Leo stole some ideas, and also he streamlined some things, and he did some things in a way to make the guitar mass producible. And again, I don't want to sound like, Leo Fender just stole a bunch of stuff. He did take some ideas and he did some modifications to it, and but there'd be no, the Broadcaster Telecaster would not look like it does if he hadn't seen the Merle Travis guitar and borrowed it. So, of course, Broadcaster comes out, and Paul Bigsby is kind of a little bit miffed, but kind of really doesn't care because Paul Bigsby's making one-off instruments, and, you kind of have to think of him as kind of like Dumble or Trainwreck or something like that. I mean, he's making guitars for stars and one-offs. And so he doesn't really care. And his instruments are really fancy. They have fancy woods and fancy inlays, and they're all completely handmade by one guy. So he's not really concerned about Leo Fender's Broadcaster that comes out in late 1950. So in 51, let's get back to the vibrato history. So in 51, the vibrato comes out. Paul gets, he gets contacted by Gibson, who wants to be able to use them on their guitars and kind of has an exclusive thing. But then Gretsch comes along and they want to also. And so they end up making kind of a deal where Gibson gets a better price. And then Leo, of course, is having some success with the Broadcaster, Nocaster, Telecaster, and enough so that Paul Bigsby makes the second variation, or actually this first variation after the B6, and it's the B16, which is designed specifically to go on the Telecaster, as seen here. As you can see, it's this gigantic cast aluminum piece that, unlike this B5, it replaces the whole thing. So literally you take the bridge off your Tele and this thing replaces the whole thing. And it's got a fixed, aluminum bridge that's non-adjustable for intonation. And and it goes on there. Well, Leo Fender's not happy about this at all. And this information comes from Richard Smith's Fender, The Sound Heard Round the World. So Leo doesn't like that his old buddy, Paul Bigsby, has made a vibrato for his guitar, that it doesn't need to be modified. So he's already hot and heavy on the Strat, and that just makes him focus even harder on making the Strat. And of course, it has to have a vibrato on there, and he has to be able to kind of throw it in Bigsby's face. And of course, he ends up making it with a headstock that looks even more like the Bigsby headstock than the Tele. So of course, the Strat comes out, and Paul Bigsby is very offended. He's very upset. And so he ends up ceasing production of the B16. So the B16 is only made for 53 and part of 54. And then there's legal wranglings going on. And it turns out that Leo is able to show, or at least Leo's lawyers are able to show prior use with these Croatian instruments, which, I mean, I guess you have to hand it to his lawyers. But, I mean, golly, it comes down to Leo Fender borrowing the Bigsby guitar. But, Paul's upset about it. Leo keeps going on his way, and he continues to use things that he took from Paul Bigsby, including the Fender acoustics with their 6-in-a-line machine heads. They look almost identical to the re-necked Martins and Gibsons that Paul Bigsby did in the 50s and early 60s. So, a lot of bad blood there. So, because of this, there are not many B16s out there, and then you do not, and there was never one factory installed. So I asked Nacho Banos, the patron saint of the Telecaster, and he said no, he's never been able to find a B16 that was factory installed in the 50s. So that's it. And then, of course, they were only made for a year and a half tops. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the players that had B16s that got them back in I guess 53 or so. One of them would be Paul Yandel, which we'll see here. This is a very young Paul Yandel playing a blackguard with a B16 on it. I don't know that there's any recordings of him using this guitar. This is obviously before he played with the Louvin brothers and Jerry Reed and Chet Atkins and everyone else and their dog. But Paul was a great player, and you can see that he took his blackguard and had a B16 put on it, and he's got his initials on the pickguard, which was, of course, a very common thing to do to personalize your guitar. So the next guy is probably one that you are familiar with, and that's Bob Bain. So Bob Bain, he had his blackguard, and he had a B16 installed on it, and he also had a PAF put in the neck position. And he's most famous for playing this. Yes, Bob Bain played Peter Gunn on his blackguard with a B16 on it. And of course, I'm sure he used the bridge pickup. But he used that guitar a lot on sessions and live because he could get more of a jazz sound with the PAF in the neck. And then he, of course, had the bridge pickup for your kid, your greasy kid sounds. And then he had the vibrato, the B16, to get, all the hip new sounds that you needed with a vibrato. Fender the custom shop, I should say, made a copy of that guitar, and it's called Son of a Gun, and it's pretty cool. The next one is one of my favorite players and a great Tele player. And of course, he also played Mose Wrights and later on played a PVT-60 with an MSA mechanism that would raise and lower every string. But it's Phil Baugh. And so here's a shot of Phil Baugh with a blackguard with a B16 on it. And Phil was a really great player, and he used the Bigsby on his Tele along with a volume pedal to do kind of steel guitar effects and other type of imitating other instruments too. So let's do like just a quick rabbit hole, let's go down the rabbit trail a little bit with, there was a whole school of guys that used volume pedals and vibratos to kind of do steel guitarish kind of things. And it has to do with, you're not doing full on swells. You're just kind of ducking the first part of the note. So you kind of have the volume pedal up maybe halfway, and then you bring it up after you hit the string. So you're kind of ducking the attack. And then you play things that are more like a pedal steel guitar. And then you're able to add vibrato with the Bigsby. So you get things like this. So it's a cool sound. And, Phil Baugh did that, as did other guys. And probably one of my favorite examples is not with a Telecaster. It's Waddy Wachtel. So he was very adept at doing those kinds of things. He had a burst, a 1960 Les Paul with a B5 on it that he used quite a bit with J.D. Souther and Linda Ronstadt and other cats. And there are some really cool examples of him doing pedal steel type things using the Bigsby and a volume pedal. And that was basically his only effects was the vibrato on his guitar and a volume pedal. And there's a really cool live recording of Waddy playing with Linda Ronstadt. I think it's like in the late 90s or early 2000s. It was kind of like a benefit show in LA for Fred Wallachy, and who owned one of the cool music stores there in LA. And they do Blue Bayou, and Waddy plays this. He plays Dan Dugmore's steel guitar solo on his Les Paul with the B5, and it's just gorgeous. Okay, Thanks for letting me go off on the rabbit trail. Okay, so then you got Phil Baugh, who he later on took his B16 and moved it onto a custom Tele, in the 60s. And here's a shot of him with it that, of course, he had painted it white and had put his name on it. And, of course, it's all about personalization, as it were, because you want to be a star, don't you? And then we get to the most important B16 user of all time. I mean, this guy really, set the bar. And it's the king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley. Of course, I'm being facetious. I love Elvis. But Elvis had a B16 equipped Blackguard that he used in the movie Girl Happy. So it probably is the most seen B16 vibrato ever. And people have erroneously said that this was Bob Bain's guitar, but Bob Bain's guitar had a humbucker in the neck by the late 50s, and of course this movie was shot in the 60s. And but it's not, and so of course that's I need to thank James V. Roy for that information about that guitar. So, and you guys for letting me have a little fun at your expense with talking about Elvis and stuff. And of course, you notice that he's got the strap going from the butt end of the guitar up to the headstock, so that he can move around more and gyrate and everything, which is really important if you want to be a star, because and that's where the money's at. It's not playing these guitars, so why are we even talking about this? Okay, we'll keep going. So, what makes the factory-equipped Bigsby possible is the sale of Fender in January of 1965 and the sale of Bigsby in January of 1966. So, of course, CBS buys Fender and Ted McCarty buys Bigsby. And at that point, the slate's clear because everyone that had drama, that had skin in the game, is gone. So, and Fender, the CBS Fender, with new marketing guys and this influx of guys, they're ready to freshen up the Telecaster because the Telecaster is 15 years old at this point. And just to go back a little bit, the Telecaster was really suffering in sales because it was really being beat out by the Stratocaster, the Jazzmaster, and the Jaguar. Why? Because that's what the surf guys and the instrumental guys are playing, and they all have vibratos. And so it probably would have helped the Telecaster, it probably would have helped the sales a little bit in the early 60s. But yeah, the Tele wasn't doing well in 61, 62, 63, even into 64. In 65, it starts to pick up because of the blues-based guys. So that's, and R&B guys. So then you've got Mike Bloomfield, you've got Steve Cropper, you have Jeff Beck with the Yardbirds, and later on Jimmy Page with the Yardbirds. And you've got the session guys in Memphis like Reggie Young, and you've got some of the Nashville guys like Billy Sanford and Fred Carter Jr., and also you've got Buck Owens and Don Rich, out in L.A. And so the Telecaster's starting to pick up some steam, but still Fender felt like, CBS Fender, the marketing guys felt like the Telecaster needed to be freshened up. So they had a couple ideas. So, and the group is like this: Blue Floral Tele, Paisley Red Tele, Tele Thin Line, and the first to be released is the Bigsby-equipped Telecaster. So the Bigsby-equipped factory Bigsby Telecaster comes out in 1967. Now, it's not in the catalog yet, but you start seeing them in 1967. And it's got a B5 vibrato, not a B16. And then it has this plate along with a Jaguar-style bridge. And, of course, it has these little thimbles, and this kind of rocks around. Now, see this F on here? That never would have happened in the Paul Bigsby, years, and when Fender was running the company. So this is Ted McCarty. This is him, tailoring the vibrato to work with the Telecaster and to, help sell more to Fender. So, it's in, you start seeing them in stores in 67, but it doesn't appear in the catalog till 1968. And that's also when you start seeing ads for it. And it's a $55 upcharge from a regular Telecaster, which is over $500 in today's money. So, and what is the difference between it and a regular Tele? Well, it's got the same pick guard, electronics, and neck, and tuners, and control plate, and all these other things. The difference is of course, it's got the this third of a pound piece of cast aluminum, and it's got this different type of bridge, and then of course it has no holes drilled through the body. So it's not really popular. I mean, they sell okay, but there's not really any famous players during that period of time that used them. So of course there's guys that kind of enjoy it and use it for different things, but probably the most famous player during that era to use a Bigsby-equipped Telecaster, factory one, this B5 that Fender's making at this point, is Carl Wilson of the Beach Boys, and he only uses his for about a year or two, and so he appears on like the Ed Sullivan Show doing Good Vibrations and some other tunes, and he stops playing the guitar. He hands the guitar off basically to Al Jardine. We think it's the same guitar, and he plays it for a year or so, and then it disappears. You don't see it anymore, and that's kind of it. And Fender does the Bigsby Tele until about 1975, and then it disappears. So there you have it. Then of course you get, kind of a returned interest, in the Bigsby later on. You start seeing some custom shop models. You start seeing some made in Japan, and even some made in Mexico. Some, just a variety of guitars being made with Bigsby's. And of course you have the sale, Fred Gretsch sells Bigsby to Fender, and then you start seeing more, Fender guitars with, more Teles with Bigsby's on them. Let's talk about maybe, some more, players that use Bigsby's. Of course, there's shots of John Lennon with one, and it's kind of like, okay, but there's not like a bunch of him using a Bigsby-equipped Tele. There's like Bruce Springsteen, some other cats, but there's not really people that are really known for playing Bigsby-equipped Teles. Probably the one that's known for playing one the most, and it's ironic because he doesn't really use the bar that much, is Bill Frisell. So there have been threads, online where people have talked about, why does he have a Bigsby on his guitar when he doesn't really use the vibrato? And there's few examples of him really using it. So this is a good transition into how does having a Bigsby on a Telecaster change its sound? Well, twofold. One, you have added mass, and two, the guitar basically becomes a top loader. So as you can see, it's got, it's not going through the body, and that changes the break angle, which changes the sound and feel of the guitar. And you have all this added string length behind here that you didn't have before, because this is a lot more string length needed here than to go through the body. Also, you have all this added mass. This is a third of a pound of cast aluminum. And so that's absolutely going to change the way the guitar sounds, because the strings are attached to this big piece of aluminum. And then it's top loaded. So I think that, if I were to guess, I think that Bill Frisell likes that sound. I think he likes the ringiness and just the different kind of sound that you get, even if you don't use the vibrato, even if you leave the arm back like this most of the time, like Bill does. I think it creates a cool sound and a cool feel to the instrument. Let's talk about some, kind of tips and tricks on these things. One thing you need to know is that on a Bigsby-equipped Tele, you're pretty much going to have a neck shim. So a neck shim is just a little piece of material, sometimes a business card, a little piece of wood or whatever, or plastic, that is put in the neck pocket, at the end of the neck pocket near the neck pickup. And what it does is it puts the neck at an angle, and it makes it to where it necessitates the bridge be raised. And that helps you to get adequate, kind of break angle, because if you don't, there's just not enough downward pressure on the bridge, and it really doesn't stay in place well, and it just doesn't sound good. And I've made that mistake because I don't really like shimming a neck. And so for a while there, I refused to have a neck shim on this, and this guitar just sounded poopy. And finally, I broke down, pulled this guitar out of the closet, and I put a neck shim, and immediately the guitar sounded so much better and stayed in tune better, whole 9 yards. So you pretty much have to have a neck shim on it to get everything, again, the bridge height and the string break angle right. Stringing the guitar. You can modify a Bigsby to where instead of the pins where you put the ball end on the pin, you can have these drilled out, or you can just get a different roller that just has holes in it, and then it becomes a lot easier to string up. This, of course, is a late 60s Tele, and I don't want to mess with it. And so the thing you do is you just get some needle nose pliers, and you hold the ball end, and then you can just give it a little bit of a twist, a little bit of a bend, not twist, a bend, and then you can kind of get it under the tension bar and around, and you can kind of hold it in place, and then you get it on the guitar, and then you capo it, and then you're able to put it on. Here's an important note, is that, of course, if you have a regular Telecaster and you're used to cutting off a certain amount of string, especially the plain strings, specifically the plain strings, is that I don't cut anything off the string, because there is so much more string going behind here that I need all of that length to just have a decent amount of wrap here on the unwound strings. Now on these I still cut off, but it has to do, I have a whole methodology, which if you want to watch the video, it's out there. But yeah, so basically on the unwound strings, you need almost the entire length of string just to get good break angle at the nut. Let's talk about, also some guys will put foam here to try to, kind of hold it, hold the ball ends in place on these guys. Another thing I should talk about is the spring. So I ordered a spring from Reverend, which was highly recommended by a bunch of guys, and it still hadn't shown up. So I hope at some point to get that. And it's a $10 upgrade. And guys said it really helps the bar kind of be at a better height. Because one of the problems that you have is this bar can really get right in the same area as the knobs and the switch here. And I have seen some guys that will reverse the plate. There's a guy named J. Leonard J, who I watched his videos on Bigsby Telecasters, and he has a vintage maple cap Bigsby-equipped Tele, and he has like a custom shop one. And on the custom shop one, he reversed the control plate. So, and I think part of that was to kind of keep things away from that, and also give you the ability to do the vibrato and also kind of do volume swells without a volume pedal. So yeah, so those are kind of the setup things. Then you need to make sure that the nut slots are clean and well cut, because again, the strings are going to catch in there. And yeah, so let's talk about this specific guitar. So this was a gift from my buddy Bill McCumber. He's kind of a more than a friend. He's a mentor. He taught me a lot about Telecasters and about country music, and about he loaned me like this huge stack of records that included Jimmy Bryant and Speedy West and Roy Buchanan, and really clued me into a whole lot of cool stuff. And so he, about a year or two ago, he gave me this guitar, and I was really glad I got to see him and eat barbecue with him down in Corpus Christi, Texas recently. So yeah, this is a really special guitar. So it's a late 60s, factory equipped Bigsby Telecaster. And I asked Bill, I said, why did you pay, the upcharge, for a Bigsby? And he said, because of Chet Atkins. So he loved Chet and wanted to be able to do that kind of thing, along with, kind of more of the modern sounds, which sure they were playing a mix of, Johnny Cash tunes and Merle Haggard and Ray Price, and but he loved Chet and liked being able to do that kind of thing also. So he had the guitar modified by Bill Lawrence himself, and so Bill had put these pickups that are kind of like what he put in. It was kind of like a soundhole pickup, but also an archtop pickup. It looks like it's the archtop version, and unfortunately he epoxied them onto this plate, of course, to go here, and then he screwed it directly into the body here, and they were not height adjustable at all, and I couldn't get the guitar to play right. I kept messing around with shims and other things, and so I ended up having to pull them, and basically ended up restoring the guitar to how Bill had it when he first bought it originally in the late 1960s. So it has some Ron Ellis pickups. This is a 60T, and this is a 50-60 Standard Plus. And these were aged by Dan Strain. Dan Strain did the restoration on this. Dan did this pick guard. Dan aged a control plate. These are Emerson pots that he used in a 3-way switch. And then everything else is, old Fender. So, of course, the finish and everything else, and, of course, the bridge. All the other stuff is original to the guitar. So this is a really great, fun guitar, and I'm glad to have it playing right and really able to do this episode correctly with it. Now it's time for me to give credit where credit is due, because of course there was a lot of research in this episode. So let me set this down so I can pick up these books. I need to thank J. Leonard J, because I watched his videos on Bigsby Telecasters a couple of years ago, and I can't point to specifically what I stole from him, but I'm sure I stole some information from J. Leonard J. So thank you, Jay. Then I need to thank Andy Babweeks, The Story of Paul Bigsby, and this is the kind of commemorative edition that John Jorgensen was kind enough to give me, so thanks to John. And of course, there was a lot of great information on the whole Fender Bigsby thing and the development of the B16 and the B5 for the Tele. Of course, how can you have a Telecaster episode without mentioning the A.R. Duchessoir, the Fender Telecaster book, which is still, probably one of the great, books on Telecasters. And this is my original edition that I got in 1990. Then Richard Smith's Fender, The Sound Heard Round the World, which of course had the part about Leo being upset when Paul Bigsby developed the B16 for his broadcaster Telecaster. So this is a really great book that you ought to pick up. All right, the Reverend Spring still didn't come in the mail. However, I was able to find one down at Glazer Instruments. Nick Drushel was kind enough to have one and give it to me, and I'm going to, of course, give him mine when it shows up. But I have to say it's a major improvement, especially for $10. So highly recommend the Reverend Spring. It does seem to raise the bar up a little bit, and it certainly feels better than the Spring I had that was, of course, original to the late 60s. But yeah, pick up that Reverend Spring. All right. Back to the show. All right, guys. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of extra long episode. It was either going to be 2 parts or it was going to have to be long. So I appreciate you making it all the way through. Hope you enjoyed the playing, examples and all the stuff. And thank you, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.